Hi, everyone. I'm Don Rooney.
And I'm John Timpane.
Welcome to the musical Innertube, the podcast born out of a mistake.
We once meant to introduce a soothing musical interlude, but we said soothing musical Innertube, and the name stuck.
On this podcast, we talk to interesting people about their interesting lives, jobs, hobbies, and passions.
Difference makers who really make a difference.
Hi, folks. Don and I, as you know, are both radio veterans and radio fans still today. That's why we are really happy to welcome Sean Ross to the musical Innertube. Sean is a radio business researcher, programming consultant, conference speaker, and a veteran of radio trade journalism at Billboard, Radio and Records, M Street Journal, and elsewhere. And for more than a decade, his writings have appeared in the Ross on Radio newsletter. It's got news, it's got analysis, opinion, and trend articles. It's always fascinating. I read it faithfully. And reading Ross on Radio is like listening to the whole North American radio world at once. So welcome, Sean Ross.
Thank you. Thank you, John. Thank you, Don. Great to be here.
Good to have you, Sean.
Sean, we've wanted to have you on for such a long time. So let me ask you to talk just for a moment about what radio looks like as of January 2025. We've got video, we've got streaming, we've got so many alternative media today that they're not alternative anymore. It turns out that some people look at radio as alternative, but I'm wondering, how does radio, specifically radio that plays music, how does that look these days? What's really interesting?
Radio is bigger than you think and not as big as it was. The term I always use is diminished, but not demolished. The problem is radio is still the biggest piece of audio listening, at least 12 plus. Maybe not for any self-respecting 17-year-old, but, for a few of those too. What it's not is what it was for us. No one's listening with the radio under the pillow. But no one's listening with Spotify under the pillow either. If anything has that kind of purchase on people today, it's TikTok.
When I was in radio, all those many years ago, the top 100, no matter whether you were doing your own at a radio station or following billboards, was based on sales. And I am assuming that sales of singles, certainly, and even albums are not a factor much anymore. Is it downloads? Is it streaming that now determines what is a popular song?
It's streaming. For record labels, it's response on TikTok. We always say REM wouldn't get 7 albums to have a breakthrough now. If REM were signed now, someone would be on the phone with Michael Stipe telling him to do more TikToks.
Yeah, true.
Somebody would be on the phone telling him to do the use napkin challenge or whatever's happening next.
Sean, so what do you think? What's something really interesting that's going on in radio right now?
I'm working on my big annual issue, Intriguing Stations of the Year. The biggest trend, interestingly, seems kind of obscure, except if you're in the right market for it, which is Spanish language stations with Spanish language jocks and English language music. It's the newest, it's about a year old. It's the newest, most interesting thing. It was successful in Miami within weeks. And now it's being copied around the country. The other thing that was interesting to me last year was Top 40. We didn't see it in Philadelphia, but in New York, Los Angeles, San Francisco, a number of places. Top 40 kind of began to look like its old self again. It had Sabrina Carpenter. It had Chapel Roan. It had Shabuzi, Bar Song. It had big hits that everybody liked again, suddenly.
Yes.
And it had Hozier. The Hozier, nobody could have anticipated Hozier suddenly wanting to have the hit record
It's interesting, isn't it, that he had the Take Me to Church song, which was a pretty big hit. You'll know better than I do about it. And then I was listening to CBC just 2 weeks ago, and they have their hits of the year for Canada.
Yeah.
So they are quite different from ours usually. Strange Life. Hozier was up there at number 2.
Hozier is something we're seeing now. XPN is, stations like that are actually a route to top 40.
That's interesting.
That's kind of
For a Nola Kahan, for a
Yeah.
Teddy Swims, it doesn't happen much, but AAA, progressive radio, as we know it now, has these Brigadoon moments where suddenly people who you would think are too good for the radio
Yes.
are suddenly on top 40.
Yes, and we're speaking, ladies and gentlemen, about WXPN, which is the radio station at the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia, which is one of the flagship stations for a genre called AAA. Some people call it Americana, but that could mean almost anything, as Sean probably would tell you. And yes, they were playing Hozier before he had any hits. And and actually, I guess they were playing Taylor Swift before she had any non-country hits. It's interesting how things slide into each other, isn't it, Sean?
Well, and, a lot of it is just a function of label marketing campaigns. And we're going to talk about format, how formats are designated. And that's often just a function of label convenience or label marketing plans or what works for the industry.
Interesting.
I would think too that in recent years, radio has been as important as it ever was to the country market. The radio listening to country stations and the appeal of country artists over the radio is still pretty strong, wouldn't you say?
Country has the best of both worlds. They have people like Zach Bryan who, have very much come from streaming and not radio. And they've got artists like Morgan Wallen who have been helped like both. And, right now, country has, a lot of sort of fast breaking novelty songs that kind of start on the web, but happen on radio very quickly. So it also probably has the best relationship still with the record companies. In pop, the record companies at this moment care more about streaming, and they certainly regard TikTok as the gatekeeper, not radio.
Can I ask you about how Beyonce's foray into country sort of realigned things? Did it have that kind of impact?
Certainly in terms of introducing Shaboozey,
Yes.
who went on to have a much bigger hit than she did. It had a footprint. It wasn't a big hit anywhere. Everyone was waiting to see if country would play a Beyonce record, but it really lasted for 6 weeks at every format.
Interesting.
Taylor Swift started out in country, but she is definitely a crossover artist now. She has appeal to all audiences, and her appeal reaches worldwide. What's the status now of crossover artists? So people who start in one genre and just explode across? Because Beyonce didn't do that. She is a big artist, every place but country. She tried to get in there and it didn't quite work. So what else do we have out there that's crossing genres?
These days, records start from streaming, and formats, decide who wants them.
Wow, that's really interesting.
Certainly Hozier, AAA was there first, but by a matter of days, Too Sweet was on some top 40 stations within 3 or 4 days because it had the streaming numbers. And because it was an up-tempo pop record that radio could deal with. It's an old-fashioned up-tempo 4/4 fun pop record.
Yeah.
And there aren't a lot of those these days.
So, speaking of genres, let's talk about Yacht Rock. You had a December piece, and it had a title something like "How Yacht Rock Almost Sunk Top 40," and I know that Yacht Rock, as a designation of a genre, it's about 20 years old as we sit here. I think a bunch of folks at Channel 101 coined the term, and it's become not just a term of art, but something that kids say on the street. I've heard people talk about, that's Yacht Rock.
And still talking about it 20 years later.
Amazing. Yeah.
And it took hold. Of course, it's an artificial distinction. But it's I hear it from people who were there 40 years ago. I hear it from people who are learning it now, and who are learning it with hipster irony. And I've heard it from the people who lived through it the first time.
Yeah. You can't see me, but I'm raising my hand. I lived through it. I was a jock 79, 80, and 81 when What a Fool Believes, Ride Like the Wind, all those Yacht Rock songs were invented. And they were very musical. But I will tell you, I remember being on the air in like 1980 and thinking to myself, God, how boring is this top 40?
In that era, we didn't have the name Yacht Rock, but there was a radio research person, one of the early ones, who did focus groups, and people certainly did notice that everything sounded like the Doobie Brothers all of a sudden. And he coined the name genre burnout.
Genre burnout.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yes.
And it would, all the Michael McDonald sound-alikes and sign projects was where it started.
Yeah. Well, because one of the things that we said, definitely we could peg a record and its release date based on whether or not the backgrounds were sung by Michael McDonald or Stevie Nicks. They seem to be on every 1980s, early 80s release, singing background somewhere. When in fact, SCTV did a big deal on that, where they had Rick Moranis dressed up as Michael McDonald driving across town, running in and singing "A Long Way to Go," and then running back out to his car and going to another studio to sing another background.
Imagine if Rick had the music career instead of the comedy career. Or the DJ career. He started out as a DJ.
I'm not surprised somehow. I don't know why. He's got a great voice and the gift of gab and all those things. I could see where he'd be very comfortable in a music formatted radio station.
He was on Chum FM, which was the WMMR of Toronto.
Yeah.
He once did a spot for a brake repair place to the tune of Sundown.
The Gordon
and
Lightfoot
he
song.
sent it to Gordon Lightfoot for his approval, and Gordon said, your imitation's pretty good, but your guitar playing's not good enough, and I don't want people thinking it's my guitar player.
If I find you've been creeping around up that stair.
Yeah.
So you say, or at least you experiment with the idea that there was this moment in radio history where there seemed to have been a vacuum. There's a racial aspect involved, I suppose. There was a vacuum of music by African American artists for a moment. One may cavil about that also because, I would say Al Jarreau fit right into Yacht Rock in a lot of ways, but certainly is a great artist. But why did that happen? Why did that momentary lull in the supply of that kind of music happen? Because Yacht Rock seems to have gone into the vacuum a little bit.
Well, there's some irony at work here.
There's lots of irony at work here.
There are multiple, yes. It's different in Philly. Philly has always loved R&B. Philly is where R&B came back to the radio, and we'll get to that in a second too. going back to, how can Yacht Rock be Steely Dan and Christopher Cross together, which I know is, one of the things that always comes
It's an
up.
absolute insult to the pith of the universe.
Well, let's consider disco. In 1979, disco was Ain't No Stopping Us Now. Great record. Which nobody can detract from in any way.
Sure.
It was also Good Night Tonight by Wings. It was also David Naughton, Make It, which is a deservedly lost 45.
Yes.
And it was Push in the Bush. Yacht Rock is many things. Hair bands are many things. Singer-songwriter is many things. And in the 70s, it was Elton John, James Taylor, Billy Joel, and Bread. And they're all in different places now in terms of how we look at them. So, 79, disco, we have Disco Demolition. The artists like Wings and Rod Stewart, who were just visiting, they go back and have their careers and make different type of records. Sister Sledge, we barely hear from again. McFadden and Whitehead, we don't hear from again. Chic, except as producers, we don't hear from again.
Wow, I know.
And part of the subtext is, we're going to get away from Funky Town and Push in the Bush, and we're going to have quality music now. And the irony is that, there had all part of the bandwagon jumping included the Doobie Brothers. The Doobie Brothers did a 12-inch disco remix of What a Fool Believes.
When I first heard that record, I just want to say, when I first heard that record, I had to check my dosage. I said, this is a disco record. And I realized, well, they were making 12-inch disco versions of everything. Sometimes it really works.
They were making 12-inch disco versions of everything. And the truth is, just like disco came to encompass any up-tempo R&B record that happened to be danceable, even if it was really funk, even if it was really straightforward R&B. Disco, also became a marketing tool for the Doobies. It became a marketing tool for Dr. Hook. Disco, the disco movement ends at radio. It doesn't really go away because next year we have Funky Town.
Right.
But, as a format, it goes away. Philly had a radio station, the old Whippage, Wizard 100. That station had been top 40, and then it was disco, and then soon after that, I think it was religious. WFIL, the Big AM top 40, one of the all-time greats, had pretty much gone adult contemporary by 1980. In 1980, because of the disco backlash, Wi-Fi 92, the only FM top 40, briefly becomes a rock station. They become essentially WMMR with jingles.
Right, yeah.
And that doesn't change until Hot Hits WCAU comes along in 81. So Philly doesn't really have a top 40 station. Houston doesn't have a top 40 station. St. Louis doesn't have a top 40 station. Big station in Philly is Magic 103, which started out as a soft rock station and evolved to what we would now call adult contemporary. Everybody wants to be adult contemporary, or they want to be album rock. They don't want to be top 40. And, with the Doobie Brothers, you had this music that could be adult contemporary, it could be album rock. It was certainly disco underneath, and certainly R&B influenced, but it still fit everywhere. And then you had all the imitators. Then you had all of the side projects that Michael McDonald, so generously contributed to. And you had Christopher Cross, but you also had Air Supply. You also had Paul Davis.
I Go Crazy.
Oh, yeah.
You also had I've Never Been to Me by Charlene.
Sure.
Yeah, my least favorite hit song of all time.
I used to do a thing on the air where I had a contest saying, I'm going to play a record and you got to tell me what it is. Is it Firefall? Is it Pablo Cruz? Because there were like 3 or 4 different bands in there that put out records that sounded exactly the same. They all seemed to use, and I know that the Yacht Rock documentary that was on HBO tended to show that this group of musicians that worked with the Doobie Brothers and all these other groups, Christopher Cross and all the others, all the backgrounds were like the new Wrecking Crew, the new group of people that were studio musicians that worked on everybody's record.
Jake Graydon.
Yeah. And they made them sound all the same.
Everybody had a flute. Everybody in R&B had a flute at the time, too.
Well, so did Do the Hustle. But
You Are the Woman.
You Are
that
the Woman.
starts out with a flute. That starts out with a flute. That the flute is in the intro of that one.
Strange Way.
Yeah, Strange Way to Tell Me You Love Me. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I want to say also that some of the disco versions actually were pretty wonderful. I mean, Nothing But the Girls Missing You, they did that in a disco version, which I think is tremendous as a song.
Yeah, it's the definitive version.
Yeah, I think so too. I think it completely has eclipsed the original. That's not always true, but that one is certainly true. I think Stevie Wonder's redo of All I Do, which is a dance redo of a very old song from the 60s, that's definitely definitive. So, I mean,
Bonnie Pointer. Heaven Must Have Sent You.
Heaven Must Have Sent You. Absolutely.
I like the original, but I love the remix.
Yes.
Let me stick in one more R&B reference here that goes along with it. I was listening to an interview, I believe it was on NPR just a couple of days ago, with Sterling K. Brown, the actor who was on This Is Us and some other television shows. And he was talking about, how much he liked his father. And he said, growing up, his dad would take him out to do everything. He would take him out to work on the car and take him out to, go fishing and other things. And he'd say, my dad would always have the radio on and he'd always have his Michael McDonald on, Minute by Minute and all that other stuff. And I'm thinking, here's a black family. Michael McDonald, famously, I guess, has always appealed to the black community and always seemed more of an R&B artist than any kind of adult contemporary artist or something like that.
Michael McDonald, Hall & Oates, Wham, there have always been reverse crossover artists.
Oh, yeah.
Plus, everybody really does listen to everything.
Yes. Now, this is a wonderful point. Thank you.
And, it's more true than ever now, but I worked at an R&B station. I worked at an R&B oldie station that played Tommy James' Crystal Blue Persuasion. I didn't play it, but Carly Simon, You're So Vain.
Oh, very popular. Oh, yeah.
And played in Chicago as an R&B record.
Well, okay, so I'll just tell a short story about this, which is the guy who used to make my pages at the Philadelphia Inquirer, Vernon Clark, very close friend of mine, African-American. I invited him to go see Steely Dan across the river in Camden. So we went ahead, we parked the car, and as we're walking into the venue, Vernon grabs my arm and says, now, John, when we turn the corner, all you're going to see are brothers. Just be ready. Okay. And I didn't realize until I turned the corner and realized I was about the only Irish American paleface for miles, that Steely Dan was serious crossover. And I mean, serious, at least for the people in that place. And they were all ages. And crossover is a strange thing. It shows you how little we really know about the imaginative lives of people. Because you're right. Everybody listens to everything.
It shows you music is the unifier.
Yes.
And, and that it works both ways. And, when we get mired in the discussions about who belongs in the Hall of Fame, and you can tell that they are really stalking horse discussions for talking about something else. It's too bad that music is being used to take people away from each other. Like everything else, it's too bad that music has become, in many cases, like every other toxic discussion. Because it was a unifier, and it was something that built empathy, and it was something that built understanding. And I think in moments of optimism, it still is. Certainly, if you look at the late zeros and early teens, everybody liked Usher. Everybody liked Dynamite by Tayo Cruz. Chris Rock was interviewed for the movie Top 5 about older guys debating their top 5 rappers. And Chris said, mostly my kids listened to Top 40. And at that moment, everybody did. And it united. It united black and white. It united mothers and daughters.
The top 40 that I grew up with was really crossover. I remember Lonely Days and Lonely Nights by country artists.
Wasted Days and Wasted Nights. Freddie Fender.
Yeah, Wasted Days and Wasted Nights. Thank you. I remember Frank Sinatra on the top 40. It was really, really the top 40 sellers everywhere. And then eventually, by the time I got into radio in the 70s, we started having demographics. And this station is only going to appeal to this group of people. And they started to break things up a little bit. And then it was like, well, this is AOR. We're not going to play, And again, AOR started out with WMMR and WPLJ out in New York and stuff like that. That was playing classical and Frank Sinatra and the Grateful Dead. So
AOR played Stevie Wonder.
Yeah.
AOR played Earth, Wind, and Fire.
Right.
AOR played the first Brothers Johnson album.
Right. And somehow that got demographed to death right around the time that we're talking, right about the time of Yacht Rock. We started having...
Well, the disco backlash claimed that too.
Absolutely, dude.
Disco backlash happened in rock radio first.
It's so interesting about the notion. You said something in passing that I want to echo, which is, that this music, you were talking about a kind of music of 30 years ago. These songs are all in different places now in terms of how we look at them. This is just quoting something you said in passing, Sean. I'm fascinated by that process. I love to hear, I'm a musician. Sometimes younger people will come up and because they see that I'm a million years old and they'll go, boy, what was it about your music? We really love Jimmy. We really love Janice. They start this whole thing and I realize they like the same artist. They might like different songs though. And that's what I'm really fascinated in is that, the pantheon is changing with the generation, and,
Billy Joel Vienna.
Yeah.
It was, at a different place in the pantheon.
Yeah.
In 1977, it was One More Good Cut on the Stranger, but it was no Italian restaurant. It was, it wasn't Only the Good Die Young. And yet, it's the one that, an 18-year-old might know first now.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, the other day I heard on a college radio station, people were talking, Okay, so what's your favorite Beatles song? I thought that was interesting, but it's something I still hear people talk about on the street a lot. I see like 7-year-old kids going down the street singing "Come Together," uh, which I think is great. Well, that song, let's think about it. That song gets the heck played out of it still today, you know. And it might not have been the one that you would have chosen to do that at the time because there were other things getting played. And then, and on this radio station I was listening to, they said, well, my favorite one is "Hey Bulldog," and everybody goes, "Yeah, that's so cool. Hey Bulldog." Yeah, well, they play the heck out of that. I just love it.
Two things happened. One, I watched Yellow Submarine. I made my dad take me to the theater to see Yellow Submarine 4 times, and then I got the soundtrack. Also, Sirius XM, about 10 years ago, on their Top 40 channel, decided to play that as a current, as a way of promoting the new Beatles channel.
Yeah, I remember listening to a live recording recently of Dave Grohl and the Foo Fighters, and when he decided to do this live recording, the Beatles tune that he picked to do was "Hey Bulldog," and he said he did it because that's one of the songs he grew up with.
Well, I've got one more Beatles for you. "Obladi Oblada," became a wedding perennial. Was reissued, but not a hit in the 70s.
Yeah, I was at a wedding of 30-year-olds earlier in the year where they concluded the whole wedding with a gala playing of "All You Need Is Love." And I see all these 30s and 20-year-old people with their arms around one another swaying to and fro, you know.
I went to a bat mitzvah a few years ago, and they were doing the candle lightings, and when they had all the older aunts and uncles come up, the song that the DJ played that he thought was old people's music, which is to say 50, was Etta James' "Something's Got a Hold on Me," which was never a hit. It was sampled by Avicii, and it was sampled by Flo Rida. And to that 20-something DJ, that must have been what we were listening to
Back in the day.
60 years ago. But it wasn't.
I'm sure there are other stories of how songs that got sampled became famous after they got sampled to more people than ever listened to them. I guess you just gave an example, something that's used in a movie, something that's used in a promotion. I don't know, but you do see.
Well, songs do come back through syncs, and sometimes they become running up that hill.
Oh, I know.
But sometimes they become Pass the Duchy or Olivia Newton-John Twist of Fate. They're used in other episodes of Stranger Things, and they never catch on to the same extent.
Well, I'm so glad you mentioned Running Up That Hill. What was the show that played that got
Stranger
that started?
Things.
That was Stranger Things, because my daughter called me up and said, "Dad, do you know this woman? She does this song about running up the hill." And I go, "Yes." And she does one called, and she goes, "Wuthering Heights? You're going to tell me Wuthering Heights?" I thought to myself, I have gone to heaven, man, because no one had heard of that when I was in England. It became number one, went back to the United States, and people were going, "What is this garbage? I don't want to hear it." But now it's a thing. She's a thing. Kate Bush.
Well, or our generation, which thought it was a Pat Benatar song.
Right. Sean, you should come back. We would have just so much fun, because not only because Don and I lived through a lot of the stuff that you're talking about, but because you're really, you have a great hold on the really big picture, which is what is music doing to, for, and with us. And I love the fact that you keep hope alive that the unifying nature of music can prevail, or at least exert itself from time to time.
Yeah, people enjoy when there is, a Taylor Smith monoculture moment, Taylor has plenty of detractors, but she had many more people who liked being caught up in it. And, because she'd
Oh, yeah.
gone through so many phases, you could kind of pick and choose which Taylor.
All right. You could
And-
choose the country Taylor. You could choose.
Yeah, you get
Right.
into Taylor Smith Beatles comparisons at your peril, but certainly in terms of going through
Mhm,
three
mhm,
distinctive phases,
Absolutely.
they
Yeah.
share that.
Yeah. Sean Ross has been our guest, ladies and gentlemen. We have had a remarkable half hour. We've covered so much stuff. And I never even got to say how much I love Steely Dan, but I do. And shoot me. But we have enjoyed talking about genre, about music, about where all the changes come from. And Sean, you have your finger on the pulse as always. I want to thank you for being on the Musical Innertube.
Thank you.
And folks, if you'd like to follow Sean Ross on radio, follow his columns week to week, month to month, year to year to find out what's happening in radio, you can do that. All you have to do is go to Radio Insight. That's radio INSIGHT.com/Ross-on-radio. Thanks again, Sean, for being on the show today.
Thank you, gentlemen.
And thank you for listening to the Musical Innertube.
Hey, let us know how we're doing. Send us an email at musicalinnertube, all one word, @gmail.com.
Do you know someone with a great story to tell? Let us know. Send us an email or log in to our website, musicalinnertube.com, and click on the microphone in the lower right-hand corner to leave us a voicemail.
And while you're on our website, take a few minutes to listen to past episodes of the podcast. They're all there, along with pictures and biographies of our guests, blog posts, and lots more.
And as always, our thanks to virtual band Car Radio Dog for providing us with our theme music.